Okay, I'm going to kick us off. So I'm very grateful to be here today with you guys. In setting context, so for people who are new to us on this webinar, Prime Movers Lab is an early stage venture capital fund investing in breakthrough scientific companies with the ability to kind of positively transform billions of lives. 6 pretty broad industry verticals: energy, manufacturing, infrastructure, transportation, ag tech, and human longevity. And we really do these webinars as a source of being able to share kind of with our community the work that our technical partners and experts and folks that we've been able to interact with are doing. So a really special welcome to our limited partners, our founders, our extended family, a special welcome to our new kind of growth fund LPs, helping us provide a continuum of capital to companies working on really hard to solve problems. Housekeeping, we are going to keep this to an hour. We'll start Q&A at about the 45-minute mark. And I'm Suzanne Fletcher, one of the general partners on the early stage fund side. Really my honor to kind of be working with folks on this call. And I'm excited for this topic. You know, I think for those of you who joined us on our webinar 2 weeks ago, we might not yet all be on that psychedelics journey, but I can guarantee you that we all buy stuff that comes from warehouses. So I think this is going to be a very relatable topic that people are going to be really excited about kind of what the future of warehouse automation looks like. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful partner, Dan Solomskey, to introduce himself and kick off the event.
Thanks, Suzanne. So I'm Dan Solomskey. I'm one of the technical partners here at Prime Movers Lab. We have a wonderfully expanding technical team in the works right now. So you'll be hearing from Carly in 2 weeks when she leads her own webinar. So my background is in experimental physics, or kind of what I think of as applied sciences and systems engineering. So most of my career has been spent in hardware R&D and new product development. Through that work, automation, sensing, data analytics became some of my big passions, and all these concepts really come together in warehousing and logistics, which we're going to talk about today. We have big facilities, big volumes of goods, and a lot of opportunity for tech to come in and kind of streamline the processes. So I'm really excited to talk with our panelists today and hear what's happening in that sector. So let's do some bios and talk to our guests. Justin, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure, happy to. Thanks for the invitation today. Excited to chat about the future of warehousing. So I'm Justin Young. I'm an investor with Prologis Ventures. For those of you who don't know Prologis, we're the largest owner developer of industrial real estate, or we call logistics real estate. We have about a billion square feet of warehousing space across 19 countries, 150 or so assets under management. So if you can imagine who our customers are, it's anyone that moves product from A to B and has a physical supply chain, right? So Amazon, Walmart, UPS, DHL, the list continues. On the corporate venture side, we invest in companies that solve really our customers' pain points across the supply chain. Because we touch so many different end markets from manufacturing to retail, we try to identify what are the most ubiquitous pain points that occur across those end markets, and we build theses and make investments across those pain points. So automation is a big topic, demand planning, forecasting, last mile logistics, microfulfillment, anything you might have heard in PR releases related to Amazon as technologies and topics we invest in. So that's a little bit about us. Growth stage investors for the most part. Yeah, I'll sort of pause there.
Cool. Let's hear from Matt.
Thanks a lot, Dan. I'm Matt Rendall, CEO and co-founder of Clearpath. We focus on using autonomous technology to change the way the industrial world moves. We think that supply chains really are just moving goods. And if you can move goods better, you can create healthier businesses and more vibrant economies. And so autonomous vehicles, we think, represent a step change in the way the world moves, the way economies move. And we're real excited to be bringing our technology into Fortune 500 businesses and changing the way they move.
Okay, Sam, you want to run us through your
Absolutely.
life?
Yeah, pleasure to be here. My name's Sam Lurye, founder and CEO of Kargo Technologies. So we believe that kind of the digital and physical infrastructure of some of our industrial industries is kind of really one of the final stepping stones for full material autonomy, moving goods from point A to point B. And so we're building the operating system for autonomous logistics, and that involves understanding the physical world through sensors and being able to translate that into data in the increasing ecosystem that is used to manage freight. And so we started off with loading docks. Loading docks are kind of the universal API of the industrial world. All material through warehouses and factories and distribution centers goes through loading docks. And we deploy sensors at the loading docks to be able to get a real-time ground truth understanding of freight as it moves through the loading docks and provide our customers an ability to manage their dock operations, deploy autonomous technology, and then be able to see material as it moves up and down their supply chain.
Cool. And so, the way I think about this, and the reason we brought these three folks together is, there's kind of different layers at work in the warehousing space, especially in the automated warehouses of kind of the future. We've got the sensing and intelligence layer that Sam at Kargo is really working on to know what's in your warehouse, where it's at, where it needs to be, and did it make it there? And then we kind of have the robots in the vehicles themselves, which Matt at Clearpath and Otto Motors is really working to make a reality. And then there's another layer that's less well known, and that's kind of the orchestration layer that happens, that kind of says, like, where do the robots need to be? What do they need to be doing? Where are the people? and like, how do we really get this thing working as a system? Then two other like layers worth mentioning is the safety layer itself, which we're very passionate about with our investment in Fort Robotics, which you can see in our portfolio. Making sure the robots and the humans can co-work alongside each other safely, and really even to make sure the robots can work alongside each other safely without causing property damage or destruction, mayhem. And then there's kind of a communication layer, an external comms layer that data has to go in and out of these facilities, and that's an important layer as well. And another that Fort's kind of addressing, in making sure these communications are secure, and that people can talk to the robots as necessary. The data has high integrity and isn't prone to people hacking in. So that's kind of the way I slice and dice the warehouse environment, and I'd love to kind of hear from each of you guys. Like, take us into the future. Like, paint us a picture of what an automated warehouse might look like. What are the robots doing? Are we talking full automation, or are the robots assisting and working alongside humans, like Jarvis and Iron Man, handing parts, or moving materials? And like, what other additional kind of infrastructure is needed that doesn't exist today?
Yes. No, go ahead, Matt. I'll piggyback off you.
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends how far you want to go into the future. If we start kind of with the holy grail, everyone kind of wants a lights out operation, right? Stuff comes in the dock on one side, stuff happens, value gets added, and then more valuable stuff comes out the other side.
And the lights out operation means you don't even need lights because there's no humans that need to use their eyeballs. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly right. Right. So lights out, meaning you no longer need any human life support systems. You don't need lighting. You don't need bathrooms. You don't need lunchrooms. You can regain all of the, you don't need an HVAC system, right? You can regain all of that square footage. You can repurpose or reduce all of that energy consumption and focus all of the dollars on adding value to whatever it is that you do between your docks. So that's kind of like the holy grail. Now there's going to be a gradated transition to something like that. And you're never going to have 100% fully automated facilities. You'll at least need people in the facility to do maintenance and exception handling of some form. But highly automated facilities. If you want to go even further into the future, I think what gets really exciting is this idea that a fully digitized and fully automated supply chain starts to offer in terms of transparency and the ability to trace materials all the way back up the supply chain to where it originates in the ground. We've spent a lot of time talking to strategists in the automotive sector, and given the just-in-time operations that they run, they care deeply about every nut, bolt, and screw and where it is in the world at, all the way back to point of origination. And achieving that really is only possible when you have end-to-end digitization. So I think the most exciting thing for me is that complete transparency in your supply chain and what that does for kind of global scale efficiency.
Yeah, I'll comment on that from more of an operator's perspective within the four walls of a warehouse. What's interesting is I think the technology for automation is here today. Right? There's a lot of AMR companies that have great computer vision, great algorithms, right? They can essentially drop and play, right? Drop and go in any warehouse and fulfill any workflow, whether it's pick and pack for e-commerce, whether it's moving pallets from A to B across the warehouse. You can do it. I think where the challenge sits as of now, and there's a lot of improvement here, is what's the business case and ROI for adoption? And across the industrial world, right, you have P&Ls that exist at the local level at a warehouse, right? So for a robotics company to knock on the door of a warehouse and say, hey, we have the greatest AMR that exists, that is a foreign language to many of the operators across the warehouse, that operates warehouses. And to put things into perspective, right, you have third-party logistics companies, average, sales cycle, contract cycle is 3 years. So if you sell a robot, from a CapEx perspective, it needs to pay back before 3 years. So, we're starting to see an adoption for robotics as a service models, right? Moving from CapEx to OpEx, which eases the adoption of automation across the warehouse. So I think technology is here today. I think where a lot of companies are making strides is the improvement on how do you sell to operators and how do you create a business case to where you could adopt these solutions in a more capital efficient manner that has an ROI over existing equipment and personnel.
Justin, what have you seen as kind of the infrastructure need that's kind of enabled that transition? Like, what do the operators need to get started here?
Yeah. So in Prologis land, right, the largest owner of real estate, like we want to be the arms merchant of the supply chain world, right? It's almost like Levi Strauss in San Francisco, and during the gold rush, he's selling jeans while everyone was painting for gold. We want to sell jeans, right? We want to sell robots and the infrastructure to supply the new world of e-commerce. So
I almost look at it maybe differently. You want to sell mining claims.
I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, we own the real estate, right? So for sure. But yeah, infrastructure, I think it's what you'd expect, right? I think Wi-Fi sucks at a lot of industrial warehouses. Like, sometimes they don't even exist. So we have to go like back in time to connecting our buildings to fiber and putting like Cisco Meraki Wi-Fi gateways up in a building, which you'd expect would already have, but they don't, right? So you need connectivity in buildings first and foremost to even operate some of these bots. And that's why like a lot of robotics companies, Matt can probably talk to this, like you have big GPUs on board because you can't rely on connectivity and the compute has to happen on the edge, right? And that's a design because connectivity is terrible. So from an infrastructure perspective, we're looking at connectivity because that is kind of the prerequisite for mass adoption of robots. Second to that is, how do you charge these things? Is it, do they plug into a base station and charge? Are you throwing diesel in there? Probably not inside of a building. So what are the, electrification requirements to support a fleet of robots in a warehouse, right? That is like your low level infrastructure stuff. But thinking future out, how do you orchestrate a disparate number of bots or disparate collection of bots within a warehouse. Like you're going to have Matt and Clearpath operating a bot. You're going to have another bot doing these different workflows with different operating systems. So is there a common language where these bots can communicate, and is there an orchestration layer that can essentially tell bots what to do? So that's kind of that's kind of the gambit. How we look at things, to be frank, on the investment side is we don't want to sell infrastructure that a Dematic would sell, meaning like conveyor belts, these like robust multi-million-dollar systems, because we're not industrial engineers. What we like and what we're really excited about is the future of vision-based autonomous mobile robots, where you don't need any infrastructure. You can drop a bot in and it could move and execute on a workflow dynamically, no matter what obstacles are in the way. So that's what we're excited about, and that's what we're focused on.
Sam,
I think there's an interesting study on the infrastructure side. PwC interviewed 100 top 10 largest industrial companies about what is kind of the last stumbling block for end-to-end autonomous logistics, and the results were really surprising because AI was, I think, ranked at the very bottom. Just as Justin said, the algorithms are there. Robotics was actually, I think, second bottom. We've made huge strides in our robotics capabilities. The top one, I think it was over 70% of companies ranked this as their highest stumbling block, was smart infrastructure, in particular, infrastructure to vehicle communication, where you have, as Justin was saying, all these robots moving around. You're going to have humans there for at least the next, 20 years at the minimum, but I think even further beyond that. You're going to need infrastructure, actual physical connectivity points where everything can interact in a consistent manner. And particularly, I think the loading dock, from our perspective, provides a really interesting microcosm of that, because you have autonomous technology that's starting to permeate. You have an outside factor, right? The truck, the carrier, which could be independent from the warehouse entirely. You have a huge safety concern, right? 1 in 4 accidents happen at the loading dock. And so how do you put that all together? The loading dock is kind of this really interesting place. And I think that's why we've seen, as even the warehouses get more advanced, the loading dock is still the least automated place, because there's just kind of this microcosm of all the issues we just discussed, all in one kind of concentrated physical area. And I think it also shows the limitations of where robotics and automation stand here. Everyone always asks me about, well, are we going to have autonomous robots taking pallets off of trucks? The reality is, if you've ever been to a warehouse or a factory, the guys who've been at it for 20, 30 years can unload a truck extremely fast, so much faster than any of the technology that we've seen now. So, I'm less bullish on the case that we're going to see a fully lights out warehouse anytime soon, because humans have gotten really great at their jobs, and there's actually really strong economic value to having people, for example, unloading a truck, because they can do it so much faster than any of our robots can at this point.
So that's go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to challenge that statement a little bit. I mean, we're involved in implementation of greenfield sites where you're totally freeing yourself of all of the legacy infrastructure and decisions that have been made from building a facility 20 years ago or 30 years ago, which would hold you back from achieving lights out. I mean, we're literally in the process of deploying solutions where we're pretty darn close to lights out. I mean, it's not far off. The challenge is not that the technology isn't there and the systems integration and the end users with the vision. It's that tooling up for a greenfield is a massive undertaking, right? It takes years of planning and then a year or two of implementation. So I think the biggest thing causing the lag is you're not going to see lights out in a retrofit of an existing facility. You're going to see lights out in greenfields, and those just have a long runway to them. And also to the conversation about what infrastructure is missing. I mean, we're in about 100 sites, and we've assessed lots more than that, and there hasn't really been a situation where communications infrastructure has not been appropriate. I mean, it's not good. It's definitely not good compared to the front office or compared to what you've got at home, But with the way autonomous vehicles are set up, a lot of the compute does reside on board the vehicle. So you can deal with intermittent connectivity, brownouts, spotty locations, and still have a robust material handling solution. And likewise with charging, where we've got very advanced supercharging networks that we implement for our customers, and existing communicate or power infrastructure is pretty okay. That's never been an issue for us. I'm not sure if this would fit into infrastructure, but it's related, and I think really touches on Justin's point about interoperability. The standards or orchestration rather, and that's interoperability. The standards really need to catch up. We need a common framework for designing how machines communicate with infrastructure, or how infrastructure communicates with the WMS. And interoperability standards, safety standards, and well, another one that we're very actively monitoring is V2V communication standards. How do you leverage advancements in those standards to change the way a fleet orchestrates itself on a shop floor? And we do what we can to participate in the steering bodies that govern these standards, but I think generally speaking, any really advanced technology always outpaces the standards that will ultimately need to catch up. So I think that's something that really is a profound lever in how quickly we can achieve broad scale lights out. And in order to get the orchestration, you need interoperability, and orchestration is kind of a prerequisite to that business case, which Justin alluded to as kind of like, that's just table stakes if you want to be successful in having this type of automation adopted.
That's a really interesting point about the need for standards and interoperability. It's kind of, it raises the question on who owns these different things. Is it the warehouse operator who may not know anything about robotics? Is it the roboticists making the vehicles? So this is where I see a deep need for people coming in at Prologis's level, like, hey, let's build a facility. And to your point, Matt, you're not going to retrofit as easily as you're going to be able to build a facility custom tailored to these new technologies. Yeah, so that's an interesting question about who owns it and where these are going. The other question that it raises for me is this is an old and mature industry. As you say, some of these warehouses might have been built 100 years ago, 50 years ago, and have been retrofitted with better power and whatever else, and have some Wi-Fi slapped in there, and maybe that's good enough because the roboticists are really thinking about what problems they're going to face in these facilities. But it kind of it has me ask, what's changed that's really been making this the right time for penetration into this sector? Have there been major advances, or people coming around to the economic benefits of this? And how have the incumbents been reacting to the rise of automation?
Yeah, I can quickly comment on that. So a number of years ago, Prologis Research did a study on how much more square footage would you need if you're an e-commerce shop versus a traditional brick and mortar, right? And what they found was you need 3 times more square footage to operate an e-commerce operation versus brick and mortar. The reason being is because in classic brick and mortar, you have a distribution facility, you have a hub, and you have your retail stores, right? In your retail stores, they hold inventory. There are workflows that exist across these different nodes that are sort of spread out. Across the e-commerce shop, all those workflows that existed across these different nodes happen at one place, right? Your inbound, your pick and pack, your packaging, everything happens in this one facility now, to where you need a lot more square footage. You're holding more inventory. SKU proliferation is a real thing, right? So you need a lot more space. So when we talk about automation adoption, lights out facilities, I think we're going to see lights out facilities across different asset classes first. So I think we're going to see sort of your last mile micro fulfillment centers, small footprint, very select SKU assortment, those are going to be highly automated. Those are going to be, there's going to be robots. There's going to be maybe a handful of people operating at very high throughput. They're not going to be holding inventory for very long. As you go upstream, I think you're going to see more traditional operations mixed with automation. And the question of, will humans be displaced? And I don't think we'll see that tomorrow, maybe in the next 15 years, sure. But what we're really sensitive about is, frontline workers are incredibly important, to the industrial environment. And we've seen this during COVID, right? You can't hire enough frontline workers. So we're really, really focused on how do we upskill the workers that exist across our roofs, which is about 1 million frontline workers across Prologis buildings. How do you upskill them? How do you retain them? How do you attract new talent, right? Because at the end of the day, automation isn't quite here yet to replace full-time employees, nor do we see, they won't replace employees in the next 10 years. So we need to really build out a robust talent pipeline that could be roboticists one day, right? And work on some of this equipment.
You're touching on a really important point, and it's, consistent with our experience. We're not going into sites where customers are saying, hey, I've got too many people, I need to get rid of people. The problem, and I think actually one of the fundamental drivers of the adoption wave that we're seeing, is scarcity of those people. And there's tons of analysis coming out about the availability of skilled labor and the gap that's going to exist over the next 10, 20 years. So, the macro analysis is supportive of that, but like boots on the ground, I can't really think offhand of a single program that we've implemented where the thing that's driving it is they can't find good people fast enough to keep up with the demand that their business is facing. And so it's almost like, well, we've kind of already exhausted, or we've been living with this problem of not being able to attract enough people fast enough. We've got to find another way to do it. And I'll give you like a really simple example. We do a lot of work in kind of Midwest US, small manufacturing communities that are kind of propped up on a single big manufacturer, and that kind of is the cornerstone of that local economy. One of our customers is in this type of a situation. They employ, I think it's 2,500 people inside of this one facility. That's the population of the town. And obviously that whole town isn't working age. So they're literally busing people in from the adjacent communities, and there just aren't the people. So it's a very real problem, and I think is one of the prevailing drivers, at least from what we see.
Yeah.
So there I'm hearing robots aren't going to steal all our jobs. They're doing jobs that we actually don't have enough people to do, and filling an actual need gap.
Look at like just basic unit economics, right? If e-commerce penetration continues to increase, and across our portfolio, we've had like 40% increase in e-commerce penetration within like existing customers. So our existing customers are turning into e-commerce shops, right? So there's a need for higher throughput. And whether or not that replaces full-time employees, no, because they need to augment that resource with automation to improve output. Right? So it's not a question of replacing people. It's how do you push packages quicker out the door, and how do you bring packages quicker inside the door? Right. And if whatever happens in the back end, whether that's human augmented with automation or automation completely, that is sort of the recipe I think a lot of users are going to be playing with.
Yeah, I think piggybacking off that, you make the distinction between value creation in the next 5 years versus value creation in the next 20, 30 years. And value creation in the next 5 years is really going to center around human augmentation. Because exactly what Matt said, all of our customers are just not being able to hire fast enough, right? So if you can make a task that took an hour take half an hour, or half an hour take 10 minutes, then you're really augmenting the workforce that they have. And that is what's really going to drive immense value creation over the next 5 years. You see it, I think, with Kiva Robotics as a great example in Locus Robotics, where they don't do the entire pick and place task. There's still a lot of human improvement that needs to happen there. But the simple task of just moving goods around the warehouse greatly increased the human productivity. And we're trying to do the same thing with the unloading task. Someone's still driving the forklift, but if you remove the scanning capability, you actually reduce the unloading event by 48%. And so you're still having a human there, but suddenly they can unload twice the amount of trucks they can for the same amount of headcount. So it's not about reducing the amount of people in the warehouse necessarily. I think it's about augmenting their capabilities and then thinking about how we can build on that infrastructure to go to something more automated.
Do you feel like there might be a new class of job that even pops out from this? I mean, the obvious one is like somebody has to fix the robots, but like, is there anything else that kind of like emerges, you know, at the fringes or in the niches between the robot functions?
I think there's going to be a lot more industrial data science. I mean, there's already is a lot, but suddenly we're seeing a huge wave, and this is across all industries. This is not particular to industrial applications, but just a huge wave of data and a much more consistent wave of data. I think Samsara did this really well for trucking with ELD devices. Suddenly you have live stream of locations of all the trucks across their customers' entire fleets. And suddenly you need to do something with that data and actually derive insights. And so we're talking about digitization of the supply chain, but there actually needs to be a lot more investment in analyzing that data. And in the warehouse itself, with increasing the amount of sensor class you have, and you're able to collect data in a much more structured way using computer vision, you're collecting data about visual items that you've never been able to in the past. I think there's going to be a phenomenally interesting application layer, not from necessarily a startup Silicon Valley, we're building a new dashboard, but actually internally, like for every industrial customer, they're going to need to develop their own in-house analytics capabilities. Something that they've done traditionally on the industrial automation side. Most large companies do a lot of the industrial automation without outside partners. And I think we're going to actually get more into the data science part where they're going to become more and more savvy, understanding the insights that all this data is producing.
And how have you guys seen some of the kind of large incumbents in this industry reacting toward automation, and what in the past kind of few years has changed in terms of that reaction?
Yeah, I can touch on that. I think your big three retailers, your Fortune 100s with large R&D budgets, robotics experts, they have experimented, tested, and deployed robots to the best of their ability. And some work, some haven't. A lot of it's in secret because they don't really want to share faults right. But so I think large incumbents, yes, they have adopted automation. They have a pretty stringent plan around automation. For the tail end, SMB tail end of the market, they don't have an R&D arm, right? They don't know how to look at robotics automation. So that is going to be two large markets that are going to be untouched for some time. But that's kind of where we want to position ourselves, right? We're never going to sell a robotic solution or offer a robotic solution to Amazon, right? They have a team to do that. But we want to help the SMB players, right? In the mid-market and in the tail end of the industry adopt automation. So, we always talk about, there's two ways to make money. It's bundling and unbundling. I think right now you see this entropy of solutions out in the market. It's somewhat chaotic. What's the best solution to use? And I think there's going to be, I wouldn't say consolidation per se, but I think there's going to be solutions that are really focused on bundling applications together into kind of a common architecture, whether that's orchestration that we talked about or not. But I think there's a need for bundling that can really cater to a broader market, such as SMB.
Bundling of solutions?
Bundling of solutions, bundling of robotics automation. And what I mean by that is, like, if you look across robotics companies, a lot of them execute on a very specific discrete workflow, right? If you look at Locus Robotics, unicorn robot company now, they're really good at goods to person e-commerce pick and pack, right? That is their discrete workflow. That's what they do well. If you look at maybe a third wave automation who's doing forklift movements on the vertical axis and then put pallets in racks, that is a discrete workflow, right? So there's going to be robot companies out there that are going to do those discrete workflows really well. So when I say bundling, how do you put all that into one common architecture or control tower, if you will? I think that's going to be sort of the focus moving forward. Whether that's on the OEM side or end user side or application layer, that's kind of to be determined.
Matt or Sam, do you have perspectives on kind of the incumbents in the space and what they're most hungry for?
I think, you know, it's a pretty cliched opinion at this point, but obviously Amazon driving logistics improvements. We've seen it actually with industrial distributors who, you know, aren't directly competing for the consumer that Amazon is, but there's the same kind of wave of expectation. One really interesting thing on our side, and maybe Matt can offer his perspective on the automotive industry as well, is suddenly the automotive players are also looking at upstart companies, Tesla being the obvious one, but Rivian, Lucid, where now new companies can finally enter and actually build cars. And so I think that's pushing, first of all, a wave of investment in these upstarts, but also looking at their own internal operations and saying, well, we need to really speed it up. So kind of like the Amazons of the world, we're seeing it in other industries as well. It's I think a tale as old as time. It's not particularly new opinion that just seeing companies innovate, even in industries that they haven't traditionally been able to, it's finally pushing kind of the needle across the line to be able to look at your own operations so that you can keep up. But I think the counterpoint to that, and it's now I think pretty well publicized, is Tesla. You know, Tesla had the opportunity, and this is slightly dated at this point, but had the opportunity to build the state-of-the-art factory in Fremont, and part of that state-of-the-art was to automate everything. And again, this was about now a while ago, but the material handling system was fully autonomous, and they had to rip it all out because the reality is that the technology wasn't being able to handle all the sort of variants that they were seeing coming into the auto world. So it's a fine balance between trying to do kind of the step function, fully autonomous, really push the boundary for these incumbents versus looking at companies that are starting to have better operations and starting to invest in their own.
Yeah, from our experience on the manufacturing side, and I should clarify, I mean, we focus much more on the manufacturing side of the equation. You know, there's an arms race happening in e-commerce. The growth profiles are crazy, and that's putting a lot of pressure through the supply chain in order to change the way your operation is structured. We think the manufacturing world ultimately over the long term represents a much larger total addressable market, and much of the Fortune 500 manufacturing world is already heavily automated from a discrete process perspective. Like if you look at automotive, for instance, stamping, welding, paint, there's hundreds of millions of dollars of discrete process automation that's been implemented, and that's part of how they vertically integrate and add value. But in these massively automated facilities, you still have people pushing carts to the in-feed and receiving goods from the out-feed of those machines. So material handling from our perspective in the manufacturing space is kind of the final frontier of automation. And where we see the most success is in connecting these discrete pieces of automation with the material handling API that just makes sure you've got end-to-end streamlined flow of goods. So the incumbents are already very hungry for automation, have a long track record of adopting automation. The big difference is that, well, now with advances in compute and sense and power and the algorithms that support it, as well as connectivity, this idea of an autonomous vehicle that feeds and pulls from these pieces of equipment is now practical. So, it's a combination of technical trends and demographic trends really lighting up material handling automation in the manufacturing sector.
So, we have a few more minutes in the general discussion, so I want to try to get through another question or two. So, who gets hurt by this technology? Like, which incumbents, if they fail to adopt, are going to be like really finding themselves squeezed? And like, how much does this really impact the bottom line of these facilities? Like, is this a nice to have, or is it, something that's becoming essential?
Yeah, I think it's becoming essential, right? I think automation surfaces a lot of needs that have been traditionally hard to come by, which is visibility into inventory, objective information around operational efficiencies. And if you can digitize these things, you can make incremental improvements, which is, what every industrial organization should be focused on. Who gets hurt? I'd argue that not many would. I mean, like at the end of the day, these solutions are improving operational efficiencies, which is a win-win for everyone. I'd argue that someone like a Prologis could be potentially hurt because, we have the ability to potentially cannibalize ourselves. In that if we are offering automation solutions that limit the need for our customers to open up, to lease a new building somewhere else, that is a risk to us, right? But I think that's a risk we're willing to take because if there is efficiency improvement that we can bring to our customers, that is a win for the industry, right? And if supply chains will be more efficient and energy efficient, so on and so forth, it's kind of a greater good, if you will.
Well, on the extreme practicality side, the cart manufacturers may get hurt. The manual push carts, maybe
Sure.
the conveyor belt makers to some degree. If AMRs are moving all your material around, do you actually still need these big clunky conveyor belts? I'm just curious, like who else might we see dropping off, and then who's benefiting the most? Like, as the end consumer, do we actually see a difference now that all of these processes upstream of us are kind of being more automated?
So maybe start answering the question backwards, right? Does the end customer experience these benefits? I mean, I would say for anybody who's an Amazon Prime member who experiences the benefits of same day delivery or next day delivery, that's only possible because of massive investments in digitization and automation. A maybe less obvious example and another trend that I think is really important is mobile commerce and the expectations of today's consumer. Not only do they want the item delivered today or tomorrow, worst case scenario, there's also a pretty big expectation in being able to customize to your tastes. So this idea of mass customization is part of what creates SKU proliferation, creates high mix requirements on manufacturing lines. And so your supply chain all the way up into the manufacturing world needs to be agile to cater to the specific order for Justin or for Suzanne, right? And that's a tremendously complex supply chain problem. Your automation needs to be able to respond to that. But the fact that you can open up a browser on your phone and order a good customized to your tastes, manufactured domestically, and arrive the next day, all is proof that the digitization and automation is delivering benefits to consumers today. Going further upstream, there's who's going to be negatively affected here. I think we're at the cusp of transitioning from nice to have to need to have. And so my advice for anybody who's listening that's thinking about an automation strategy, if you're not, you're entering into at-risk territory, because those that do are going to be able to offer better customer experience at a more competitive price point at a larger scale. And that's an existential risk for a business. But the good news is that this advanced automation, And it's really well proven in the cobot industry, which is kind of related to autonomous mobile robot. This new advanced automation has fundamentally changed the user experience, the risk of setup, the cost of deployment. And we've entered into an era of automation where it's been democratized. And so now, for the first time, SMBs can practically implement automated solutions that are resilient and responsive to the needs of consumers with the balance sheet that they have. Also feeding into that is the business model evolution, the trend towards a more OpEx-centric purchasing model, as well as you've shifted the risk of that transaction to the manufacturer of that good, as opposed to the SMB that would be hard pressed to shoulder the risk themselves, and they wouldn't otherwise have the skill sets internally to implement. So it's becoming a need to have, but the good news is that this new technology is democratizing the capability, and so even SMBs will be able to benefit from it.
Thanks.
Dan, should we turn it over to questions? We've got a lot of interesting ones in the chat and the Q&A.
Yeah. So one that I that jumped out at me is does the nature of warehouses change, not just the way they're set up, but actually like the footprint? Might we see a move towards like taller, smaller footprint warehouses as we have more, maybe lift automation happening inside for urban areas, or for like these regional distribution hubs that are starting to pop up? Or do robots actually enable more I'm going to just say sprawl? Like, it actually makes more sense to just keep it bigger area and flatter, and let small robots do the work.
Yeah, I'd say on sort of the last mile perspective, I think we're going to see retrofits of what has been like kind of like an urban looking building to be logistics centric, to be sort of a micro distribution hub. At the end of the day, real estate within urban city centers is hard to come by. So to build a multi-story building is a pretty hard feat. So I think, one, we're going to see a lot of retrofits, albeit there's a lot of price discovery today from real estate owners. If they buy a urban building downtown San Francisco, how much revenue could they really make off of it from a logistics perspective? And that's sort of uncharted territory. Nobody really knows, right? Cost of last mile logistics is super expensive, and the unit economics hasn't really been proved out. So there's price discovery now, but I think urban side, there's gonna be retrofits. Moving upstream, yeah, we might see multi-story buildings. We have our building in Seattle that Amazon leases. That's a Prologis building, and we've been doing multi-story stuff in Japan for a couple of years. So that's just really based on availability of real estate, not necessarily catered towards automation.
Another interesting one, another question that popped up is, how do you guys see like automated logistics in terms of like drones or aircraft? And I want to cover this one quickly because we're actually going to have a full webinar episode on this, but I wanted to hear it from kind of your perspective, like on the ground. Like what will be the role of drone delivery in the future, either last mile or inter-facility?
Well, I mean, I think inter-facility, so there have been companies out there that deploy drones for inventory management around warehouses. So this is not the last mile delivery, it's not external. Generally, I think there's, as we get better sensing technology, there's probably kind of a more straightforward way to track inventory and actually understand what the power inside the warehouse to be. Then, and honestly, there's no need to then solve flying problems or drone issues. So that's kind of the inter-facility. I think there's very limited use case there. I'll pass it off to someone else to talk about the last mile delivery.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's TBD. The cost of drones, and I know like terms of capacity that these drones can hold is pretty nominal today. So I know a DVD Group in Europe was testing this idea that they had municipality rights to move product from distribution center to distribution center flying over the Seine in Paris because it wasn't above people's rooftops.
Yeah.
But I think the technology is still technology is there. I think the business case is TBD.
Well, and really, like, the FAA won't allow it yet for the most part, other than like in these special circumstances where maybe you do have an avenue with no people in it. So I think that one's it's TBD for everybody. But I'm curious, like, and I don't want to spend more time on it now, but the thing I'm wondering about is, like, are businesses kind of angling towards a future where that's going to be possible? And again, not because of the technology. The technology is essentially there. We need some better battery technologies, but really it's a regulatory question now on, like, how big that may or may not be.
Well, yeah, regulation definitely, but also think about practically speaking, right? If we could snap our fingers for a moment and assume that regulation was taken care of and Amazon had fully actualized drone-based delivery, it would sound like you were living in a hornet's nest. I mean, it would be a pretty daunting thing to have actually in place. And so I think we should be looking at where are the most valuable implementations of the technology. And so areas where the infrastructure doesn't already otherwise exist in very, very rural or remote communities. And then also in situations like first response, where you need to get something delivered somewhere urgently because it's a matter of life and death. Those types of examples, I think, are much more practical explorations of drone delivery. That's my gut reaction to it.
Okay. So we've got another question here about the kind of the connectivity network and the communication networks. 5G and IoT are all the rage with so many companies like entering this space. Do you see these being like essential additions to these facilities of the future, or as Matt, you commented, like, is more of that work happening at the vehicle level where connectivity can kind of be what it is, or is 5G really going to shift the way that these systems get set up and integrated?
Well, I think a lot of it also depends on commercial parameters, right? Like, what is the cost for bandwidth on 5G? If you look at an autonomous vehicle, it's a data machine. It produces gigabytes per hour, right? So if you're uploading that on Canada, we're based in Canada. Canada has some of the most expensive cell phone plans in the world, right? So the thought of holding my vehicles hostage to those types of data rates in order to get access to that 5G infrastructure, doesn't matter how good the technology is if the commercial case for it doesn't hold together as well. So a lot of it has to do with, does the cost translate well to the value that's being given to the customer? And for me, it's a little bit early to say on that, but we do a lot of exploration of new technologies, and there's a handful of active programs that we're working right now with 5G. So I'm feeling very positive about 5G. We just need to make sure that the value that it delivers passes on in an impactful way to our customer.
And what what about like the private 5G systems that are getting set up, or like the kind of the small private networks? Is that going to be, in our work here, we talk to any number of companies pursuing IoT solutions for construction sites, warehousing, all manner of things. And something that we are always asking is this actually necessary, or is this actually going to be happening at the tool level?
Yeah, to Matt's point, right? If telcos want to hold on their balance sheet the infrastructure cost to put microcells up everywhere, let them do it. And if it's cheap enough for us to use, perfect. On the private LTE, private 5G side of things, the use case also has to make sense. If it's like one building that has private LTE, it doesn't make any sense if no one else is using the network. But if you have, like, for example, Prologis' industrial park in Tracy, California, which I don't know if you've ever driven on the I-5, it is crazy to look to your left if you're going southbound. It is warehouses for miles. That would make sense, right? If we had infrastructure to support sort of a private network there. But the question is, like, you know, for the Fortune 100s that have an IT team, and, you know, as we all know, IT is a hard group to break into, are they open to using sort of a private network like that? And that's also TBD, but one that we're thinking through.
Okay, so we're running up on our time. You know, something that I would love to hear from each of you, just briefly, is like, what are you most excited about in this space? Like, what should we be watching for, both as a firm and as investors, or as consumers?
Well, as investors, I think we're entering into kind of the golden age of automation. And I'd be surprised if we don't get into the tornado with lots of consolidation happening over the next 2 or 3 years. So it's a very exciting time to be active as an investor or an entrepreneur in this category. As an end user, you know, I think we're going to see the application companies come out and dominate specific segments. We were talking a little bit about Locus Robotics. You've got the platform companies, which is kind of more the strategy that we've taken. And both are going to start filling out more swaths of the market, right? So there will be more very specific application companies that come in and just nail a very specific workflow. And there'll be other companies that come in with platforms that build ecosystems that have partners that do the same thing and solve a very specific problem very well. And what that means to the end user is that over a reasonable period of time, call it 5 years, you're going to have the opportunity to take a whole portfolio approach to automation and digitization and do things in your business that you just fundamentally wouldn't have been able to do 5 years prior.
And I guess another framing there is you, like, what are you expecting to see? Like, if this happens, you expect your business to shoot up.
Well, what we're seeing right now,
COVID's a great example that none of us could have anticipated, but a great feeder for automation, for the need for automation.
Yeah, it's been a catalyst, right? It really thrust automation strategies into the boardroom, right? If they weren't already there, they're there now. And the labor availability challenge has evolved into safety and business continuity and supply chain resiliency in addition to the labor dilemma, right? So a silly example, you know, now you can maintain social distancing inside of your operation because you've got a machine which jogs materials from one person to another person. But regardless of the specific examples, you've now got automation as a top 5 priority inside of Fortune 500 boardrooms. That's going to drive rampant adoption and on a much shorter time scale. That trickles down into all kinds of different sectors and creates all kinds of opportunities for entrepreneurs. And I think everyone on the call here is going to benefit in a very material way from the shockwave of demand which has resulted or catalyzed by the COVID experience.
Thank you guys so much. I know we're at the top of the hour here, and this was wonderful. We've got a huge amount of active questions on this topic, just showing the kind of interest across the participants on this. So really appreciate the voices you guys brought to the conversation and the vision for autonomy and what's ahead of us, and thinking about that as a society too. I think you guys put that in wonderful kind of framed lens for how we can think about some of that impact. So huge thanks. Deep Tech is the best place to invest. It's a warm community that's incredibly collaborative and open, with people on the same mission to kind of push this ball forward. So very grateful for what you guys are doing and for your participation. And a huge thank you to Dan for hosting this. He has done a lot of work on automation and on warehouse automation, specifically in manufacturing. If you haven't read some of his blog posts and white papers out there, I highly encourage you to go off and do so. So we'll leave it at that. Thanks so much, guys. It's a wrap.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.